A leader's role in funding large-scale projects. Visiting three biblical examples by Aniel Barbe. Aniel Barbe, PhD, is an associate director for stewardship ministries at the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, Silver Spring, Maryland, United States. After the publication of a Dynamic Steward magazine issue on systematic giving, a local church pastor pointed out the need to train church leaders on how to finance their large projects. Systematic giving might not cover local projects requiring substantial resources. Does the Bible say something about funding large-scale church projects? To explore the subject, I focused on three biblical accounts. 1. Building the tabernacle in the wilderness. 2. Construction of Solomon's temple. And 3. Restoring the temple under King Joash. I concluded that the God who instructs his children in systematic giving also provides unique guidelines for financing large-scale or special projects. This article explores key themes related to how leadership can approach the funding of contemporary large-scale projects. It also reveals an interesting intersection between project funding and systematic giving. From God. God communicated the vision for building the tabernacle in the desert during Moses' extended encounter with him on Mount Sinai. Likewise, David sought God's guidance on how to proceed with the construction of the Jerusalem temple, even amending his initial plan after God's response. Similarly, instructions from the high priest of Joash's time guided the king's actions. In each case, leadership was firmly convinced and communicated their conviction to the people that the project was God's will. As a result, others saw participation in the project as an opportunity to be part of God's work. Executing large-scale projects can create great pressure and stress on congregations. However, the assurance of God's leading will enable them to navigate such an often turbulent period. Additionally, when church members are conscious that they are not simply paying the bills, but are involved in something much bigger than themselves, such as God's mission, it increases their motivation to give. For God. The instruction given to Moses about collecting materials for the tabernacle first emphasized God as the recipient before focusing on the structure itself. God's command was for the, quote, Israelites to bring me an offering, end quote, after which God specified that they were to use it to, quote, make a sanctuary for me, end quote. The focus was clearly on God. Similarly, David's reason for mobilizing resources for the majestic temple was to honor the Lord before all nations. The project was an expression of worship, reinforced in David's description of his gifts as an act of devotion, and by his appeal to the other leaders and people of Israel, quote, now, who is willing to consecrate themselves to the Lord today, end quote. So David was not simply raising funds, he was raising the spiritual devotion of God's people. Without minimizing the technical aspects of raising funds, it is critical not to lose sight of the fact that obtaining money for religious purposes is primarily a spiritual endeavor. 3 key incentives to giving are, quote, God's grace, end quote, God as the giver and forgiver, end quote, and God as, quote, the source of all blessings, end quote, according to Alan Corrali, an Adventist scholar whose work focuses on worship. Giving and worship, he adds, have an intrinsic connection. Quote, truly, worship is giving, and giving is worship, end quote. Through God. When the Israelites received the appeal to give to God for the tabernacle, they had just emerged from several centuries of slavery without any regular income. Yet, according to the Bible, They could give because God had miraculously provided them with articles of silver, gold, and clothing. God had preceded them in giving. King David, who made substantial donations, acknowledged that, quote, "We have given you only what comes from your hand," end quote. We see an important lesson here. God has already provided his children with the resources needed for large-scale projects. Our role is to encourage them to channel the funding in the right direction. When the church leaders uphold the conviction that a project is God's design and aimed at his glory, they can proceed with the unshakable assurance of God's provision. Invitation, simple and non-coercive. Leadership played an explicit role in inviting people to give for the construction of the tabernacle and the temple. This contrasts with two common assumptions among Christians. First is the belief that people can recognize existing needs for themselves and respond accordingly, meaning there is no need for formal appeals. Second is the idea that once people are spiritually converted, they will give automatically. While such assumptions may occasionally be valid, they are usually incorrect. Both Moses and David chose not to take that risk. Researchers Patricia Snell Herzog and Heather E. Price found that the lowest levels of participation occur among those not exposed to an appeal to give. Two striking features of both Moses's and David's appeals were their simplicity and non-coercive nature. First, they did not use any fancy strategies. While it is essential to carefully plan giving campaigns, the aim is to communicate clearly and not add unnecessary complexity. Church leadership should be cautious about investing disproportionate energy and resources in raising funds. Some activities to boost giving are strongly condemned by Ellen G. White. Quote, "Moses made no grand feast. He did not invite the people to scenes of gaiety, dancing, and general amusement. Neither did he institute lotteries or anything of this profane order to obtain means to erect the tabernacle of God in the wilderness." End quote. Nevertheless, both Moses and David achieved resounding success. The second characteristic of Moses's and David's appeals is that they did not use compulsion. In contemporary fundraising practices, it is common to determine the cost of a project and then invite each potential donor to contribute a specific amount. While this method is mathematically sound and provides a clear path to the completion of the project, it may not respect people's unique circumstances. Neither Moses nor David pursued this route. Instead, they allowed each person or family the freedom to offer what they felt impressed to give. Two key expressions characterize the process. Quote, "heart prompts," end quote, and quote, "free will offerings," end quote. The leaders trusted that God's Spirit was active in convincing people to support his projects. Big project, no special appeal. Interestingly, Joash adopted a different approach than either Moses or David. Instead of a special appeal for gifts and donations, he decided to use the accumulated regular offerings dedicated to the maintenance of the temple to fund the major restoration project. Scripture specifies three types of offerings. Quote, "the money collected in the census, the money received from personal vows, and the money brought voluntarily to the temple," end quote. The temple administration had a permanent fund set aside to maintain the place of worship, one consistently replenished by the census offering, a defined minimum annual contribution of half a shekel for every male 20 years old and older. The other two offerings were voluntary. Despite observing a delay in the repairs, Joash did not resort to special appeals. Rather, He insisted on closely monitoring the use of the three specified offerings. It illustrates how a special project can, in some cases, be funded through accumulating regular offerings without the need for special appeals. A study of United States congregations has shown that regular giving usually results in a higher volume of contributions than special one-time donations. Therefore, it may be wise for local churches to emphasize and prioritize systematic giving. A portion of regular offerings could be consistently allocated to capital or reserve funds within the church budget. The understanding is that such funds will only go to support special projects when needed. However, if, for practical reasons, emergencies, or unique opportunities, the church requires additional resources beyond what it has saved, it can still make special appeals. A word of caution, however: utilizing regular offerings toward repairs or other projects has some restrictions. The priests could not redirect all types of offerings for the repairs of the temple during Josiah's time. The Bible explicitly mentions offerings that could not be used. Quote, "The money from the guilt offerings and sin offerings was not brought into the temple of the Lord. It belonged to the priests." End quote. Their natural role in supporting the priests forbade their diversion to repairs. While it is best not to draw a principle from a single passage, the restriction on some categories of offerings for financing certain projects is well documented. Another such offering is the tithe, which went exclusively to pay the Levites. Writing to a church wondering about employing tithe money to service debt because they were facing the risk of foreclosure, Ellen G. White said, quote, "Every soul who is honored in being a steward of God is to carefully guard the tithe money. This is sacred means. The Lord will not sanction your borrowing this money for any other work. It will create evils you cannot now discern." End quote. When initiating large-scale projects, church leaders must, early in the process, clarify the restrictive nature of some funds to avoid misunderstanding and tension among the members. Creating waves of generosity. As leaders demonstrate sacrificial giving, they inspire others. David's gifts for the building of the temple are described as, quote, "a large amount," end quote, in 1 Chronicles 22:3. It was neither an exaggeration or a hyperbole. Some have estimated the contemporary value of his gift to be around $20 billion. Was he giving from the surplus of his royal wealth? No. He testified to the sacrificial nature of his donations by saying, quote, "I have taken great pains to provide," end quote. As a result of his lavish and sacrificial gift, David gained the moral authority to challenge Solomon, saying, quote, "You may add to them," end quote. Continuing with the leaders and expanding to the people, a contagious wave of generosity and support swept across the nation. This story demonstrates the power of role modeling in spiritual leadership. Leaders can create a ripple effect of generosity when they exemplify giving. While this can be the most challenging aspect of raising funds, it is also one of the most effective. Ellen G. White reminds us, quote, "It is only through the grace of God that we can make a right use of this endowment. There is nothing in us of ourselves by which we can influence others for good." End quote. God softens hearts. While each biblical project was distinct and happened at different times, leaders shared the conviction that the project was from God, for God, and made possible through God. God must be at the center of all decisions. Effective appeals for large-scale projects must be both explicit and non-coercive, avoiding marketing gimmicks that conflict with biblical and ethical values. We must trust in God's ability to soften hearts. Careful planning and monitoring of church expenses are essential. Finally, local church leaders hold a unique advantage over external or professional fundraisers. They can demonstrate the project's value through their personal giving, a critical factor in motivating others. For bibliographical and biblical references on this article, and for much more content for pastors and church leaders, please visit ministrymagazine.org.